I saw Chloe across the exhibition hall, and for the first time in years, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no longing, not even a flicker of the old hurt. Just an odd kind of peace. It was at a big tech conference in downtown Austin, the kind of place where founders and investors mingle, and I was showcasing Streamline AI, the company I'd built from the ground up. She was there with Julian Hayes, looking expensive and completely out of place. He saw me first, did this weird double take like he couldn't quite believe his eyes. He said something to Chloe, pointed in my direction, and I watched her face change as she recognized me. Saw her eyes scan the crowd, then my booth, the banner with Streamline AI's logo and our client list, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. They didn't come over right away. They just sort of hovered. And I went back to my conversation, because honestly, they weren't important anymore. But to understand how I got to that moment, you have to go back to when things were very, very different. I'm Alex. I was 29 then, pouring every ounce of myself into building AI-powered automation tools. My office was a cramped apartment in Austin, my hours were 16 a day, and my dream was to create software that could genuinely streamline workflow processes for small businesses. Chloe was 26 when we met. She worked in marketing, and she always said she loved how passionate I was, how I could explain complex algorithms in a way that made sense. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, they were a different story entirely. Old money, you know? The kind of family where your last name opens doors and your reputation matters more than your ideas. They were too classy to ever say I was trash to my face, but every single interaction felt like a test I was already failing. The first time I met them, Mr. Harrison asked what I did. When I said AI automation development, he gave me this tight smile and asked if I meant like chatbots. Like my life's work was some trivial side project, not a real business. Mrs. Harrison was worse in her own way, always circling back to stability and planning for the future. She'd ask Chloe if she'd thought about where we'd live, how we'd afford children, what kind of schools we'd want. Every question had this quiet drumbeat underneath it, this unspoken message, he can't provide. It made my teeth hurt. Chloe would always defend me afterward. She'd say her parents were just old-fashioned, that they'd come around once I got funding. That love was what mattered. I proposed after 3 years, because I was stupid enough to believe her. I'd saved for 6 months to buy a ring that wasn't huge, but definitely wasn't cheap. She said yes, crying happy tears in that same tiny apartment where I coded until 3 in the morning. For a while, things felt okay. We were planning a small wedding, talking about getting a place together, just normal couple stuff. But her parents' comments grew more frequent, more pointed. When Chloe mentioned we were waiting until my software officially launched, her mom would go quiet in this loaded way that said everything. Her dad started bringing up guys from their social circle, successful guys with corporate titles. He'd mention them casually, talking about their partnerships at law firms or positions at investment banks. Chloe would just nod politely while I sat there, feeling like a prop in their perfect family picture. The breaking point didn't happen with a dramatic blowout. It was just me being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was about 6 months after we got engaged. Chloe had invited me to her parents' house for dinner. Nothing unusual, but I got there early and let myself in through the side door like I'd done 100 times. I heard voices in the study, her parents and Chloe. I was about to announce myself when I heard my name. Mr. Harrison was talking, his voice calm and measured, like he was discussing a business deal. He was telling Chloe that I was nice, probably talented, but potential doesn't pay mortgages. I froze in the hallway, my hands still on the doorknob. Then her mom chimed in, saying they didn't raise her to struggle, that she deserved someone established, someone who could give her the life she was used to. My heart was pounding. I waited for Chloe to defend me, to tell them they were being unfair. Instead, she said, quietly, "I know, Mom. I know. I just thought he'd have real traction by now." And something in my chest just cracked. Her dad kept going, talking about how love doesn't pay for weddings or houses or private schools. How she shouldn't settle when there were men out there who could give her everything. Her mom brought up Julian Hayes, specifically how Chloe and him always got along, how he just made junior partner at a major corporate law firm at only 30. That name stuck in my head like a splinter. I backed out quietly, texted Chloe that something came up with the code, and drove home in complete silence. I didn't confront her that night. I just sat at my desk, staring at lines of code, and realized I'd been auditioning for a role I was never going to get. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Harrison called and invited us both to a small family dinner. Her voice was sugary in a way that made my skin crawl. I almost said no, but Chloe looked so hopeful, like maybe this was them finally accepting us. So I put on a button-down shirt and showed up. Julian was there, sitting in the living room like he belonged. Perfectly styled hair, a watch that probably cost more than my entire setup. Mrs. Harrison introduced him as an old family friend, said they practically grew up together. He shook my hand with this firm grip that lasted just a second too long. Dinner was excruciating. Mr. Harrison asked Julian about his cases, his clients, his firm's latest merger. Julian answered with an easy confidence that made me feel like a kid at the adults' table. Every time I tried to contribute, the topic would shift. Chloe just sat there, smiling politely, not noticing or not caring that her parents were basically conducting a live comparison. At one point, Mr. Harrison turned to me and asked about my launch timeline. Before I could answer, her mom cut in, talking about how Julian just closed a deal worth 6 figures. Julian had the decency to look slightly embarrassed, but not enough to actually deflect. I excused myself early, saying I had debugging to finish, and Chloe walked me to the door. I asked her point blank if she knew Julian would be there. She hesitated just long enough for me to know the answer was yes. She touched my arm, told me it was just dinner, not to read into it. But I was already reading into it. I was reading the whole damn book. The breakup happened 3 days later, in her apartment, late at night. I'd spent 72 hours barely sleeping. She started by saying we needed to talk, and I knew. I already knew. But I let her say it anyway. I love you, Alex. I really do. But I need stability. I need to know we're going to be okay. And I can't keep waiting for someday. Her voice cracked on that last word, like she was the one being hurt. I asked if this was about Julian. She looked away, which was answer enough. She started to say something about what her parents thought, and I cut her off. I asked if it was her parents thinking or her thinking, and she went quiet. Then she slid the ring off her finger, that ring I'd worked overtime for, and placed it on the coffee table between us like it was evidence in a trial. She told me she needed more than dreams, needed someone who was already there. I stood up. I couldn't sit there anymore. You didn't choose a better man, Chloe, I said. Not yelling, just stating a fact. You chose safety. And I walked out. 2 days later, my buddy Ethan sent me a screenshot, Chloe and Julian on Instagram, his arm around her shoulders, caption reading about finding her forever with a heart emoji. I stared at that photo for a long time before I deleted all my social media. The universe has a sick sense of humor. I learned that the hard way when my startup crashed 3 months after Chloe left, and I ended up delivering food to her and her perfect new boyfriend. People talk about rock bottom like it's one moment, one bad day. But it's not. It's a slow slide where every week something else breaks, and you just keep falling. After the breakup, I threw myself into work, spent 18-hour days coding and pitching, telling myself I'd show them all. I'd build something so successful they'd choke on their judgments. I got close, too. Had 2 potential investors interested. Meetings scheduled. Term sheets being drafted. Then the first investor backed out at the last minute, said the market was too crowded and my differentiation wasn't clear enough. The second investor ghosted me completely after 3 months of stringing me along. By the time I realized what was happening, I'd burned through my savings keeping the servers running and paying for tools I couldn't afford. My landlord wanted rent I didn't have. My credit cards were maxed. I had to shut everything down. I tried to pivot, tried to salvage some of the code, but without funding, there was no path forward. Ethan told me I could crash at his place until I figured things out. I moved in with 2 duffel bags and a laptop. Everything I owned fitting in the bed of my truck. I needed money fast, any money. So I signed up for food delivery apps, the kind where you drive around for 12 hours and make maybe $100 if you're lucky. It was humiliating in ways I can't fully describe, going from building AI systems to hauling burgers and Chinese takeout. But pride doesn't pay bills, and I was drowning. I worked nights mostly, driving through the same neighborhoods where Chloe and I used to go on dates. Every street corner felt like a ghost. Ethan never made me feel bad about it, never asked when I'd get back on my feet. He just split his groceries with me and pretended not to notice when I couldn't chip in for rent. 3 months into this new life, I was numb, running on autopilot, accepting orders and dropping them off without really seeing anything. Then one night, I got an order for an upscale Italian place downtown, the kind of restaurant Chloe always wanted to go to but I could never afford. I should have known right then that the universe was setting me up. I picked up the order, 2 entrees and a bottle of wine, drove to this fancy apartment building with a doorman and everything, and took the elevator up to the 8th floor. I knocked on the door of apartment 814, and Julian opened it. He recognized me instantly. I could see it in his eyes, that flash of surprise, followed by something worse, like pity mixed with amusement. He didn't say anything at first, just took the bag from my hands. Then Chloe appeared behind him, asking who it was. She saw me standing there in my delivery jacket with the logo on it, holding their receipt, and her face went completely white. For a second, nobody moved. We just stood there in this horrible, frozen moment. I could see behind them into the apartment, exposed brick and modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place I'd promised Chloe we'd have someday. Julian broke the silence. He told me to have a good night in this tone that wasn't quite mocking, but wasn't quite kind either, like he was talking to the help. He handed me a $20 bill as a tip. Chloe still hadn't said anything. She just stood there with her hand over her mouth. And I realized she wasn't going to. She wasn't going to acknowledge me, or defend me, or do anything except watch. I took the 20, said, "Thank you, because that's what you do," and walked back to the elevator, feeling like I'd been gutted. The worst part wasn't that they saw me like that, delivering their fancy dinner in my beat-up jacket. It was that Chloe stayed silent again, just like she had with her parents, just like she had at that family dinner. And I finally understood that this was who she was. I drove back to Ethan's place and sat in the truck for an hour. Not crying, not angry, just empty. Ethan found me there eventually, asked what happened, and I told him everything. He offered to go egg their apartment, which would have been funny if I wasn't so tired. Instead, I went inside, opened my laptop for the first time in weeks, and started deleting things. Every digital trace of the life I'd tried to build. Ethan asked what I was doing, and I told him, I don't want revenge. I want out. And I meant it. I was done trying to prove anything to anyone. Done chasing some fantasy of showing up Chloe and her family. Done letting them live rent-free in my head. That night was a turning point. Not because anything got better immediately, but because I stopped performing for an invisible audience. The AI startup thing was dead. I'd burned every bridge with investors, and I didn't have the credibility to start over in that space. So, I needed something completely different. I started small, really small, taking contract work. Basic website maintenance and IT support for local businesses. It wasn't glamorous. I spent a lot of time resetting passwords and troubleshooting printer issues, but it was steady, and it was mine. I advertised on local community boards, charged reasonable rates, and showed up on time, which apparently put me ahead of half the competition. After 6 months of that, I'd saved enough to move into my own place. Nothing fancy, a studio apartment above a dry cleaner, but it had 4 walls and a door that locked, and I didn't have to apologize to anyone for existing. Ethan threw me a housewarming party, just him and 2 other friends with pizza and cheap beer, and it felt more real than any of the fancy dinners at the Harrison house ever had. But something was gnawing at me during those contract jobs. I kept seeing the same problem over and over: small businesses drowning in manual processes, spending hours on tasks that could be automated, but couldn't afford enterprise solutions. That's when it clicked. The AI tools I'd built before were aimed too high, trying to compete with the big players. But there was a massive underserved market right in front of me. I started coding again, but different this time. Building lightweight automation tools specifically for small and mid-sized companies. Things that could integrate with their existing systems without requiring a complete overhaul. I kept my contract work during the day to pay bills, coded at night, and within 6 months, I had a working product. I called it Streamline AI, focused on document processing and workflow automation, and priced it at a point where small businesses could actually afford it. The first client was a local accounting firm that was manually entering data from hundreds of invoices every month. My tool cut their processing time by 70%. That led to referrals, which led to more clients. And within a year, I had enough recurring revenue to quit the contract work. I brought on a partner, a guy named Marcus, who'd been doing business development for decades, and we started targeting mid-sized companies, the kind that were too small for the enterprise giants, but too big for manual processes. The irony wasn't lost on me that a lot of our clients were in professional services, law firms, consulting agencies, the exact world that had rejected me. 2 years after that night at apartment 814, Streamline AI was processing millions of documents monthly. We had 20 employees, and I'd moved into an actual house with an office where I could work without sitting on my bed. Success is weird when it finally shows up, because it doesn't feel like the movies. There's no dramatic moment where everything clicks. It's just a series of small wins that eventually add up to something you didn't expect. Streamline AI became one of the fastest-growing automation platforms in Austin. We'd been featured in 2 major tech publications, and venture capital firms that had ghosted me years earlier were suddenly returning my calls. I bought a small house, nothing extravagant, but mine, with an actual home office and space to think. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't worried about money. I met someone, too. Her name was Maya. She worked as a physical therapist and had zero interest in status or impressing anyone. She'd reached out because her clinic needed help streamlining their patient intake process, and we just clicked. She knew about Chloe. I told her the whole story on our 3rd date, because I figured she deserved to know what she was getting into. She just shrugged and said people who choose based on their parents' opinions usually end up miserable. Anyway, we'd been together for 8 months when the universe decided to remind me that karma doesn't forget anyone. This brings us back to that tech conference. My conversation with the potential client turned into an actual client, and I signed a contract for a full implementation. By the time I finished the paperwork, Chloe was standing at the edge of our booth. She looked different, still beautiful, but tired in a way I couldn't quite place, like someone who'd been smiling for too long. She asked if she could talk to me. I almost said no. But Maya had taught me that closure sometimes means letting people say what they need to say. So, I told Marcus I'd be back in 5 minutes and walked with Chloe to a quieter corner of the hall. She started with small talk, asked how I'd been, said the company looked incredible. I just waited, because I knew she hadn't pulled me aside to discuss automation workflows. Finally, she got to it. She told me she'd made a mistake, that she'd listened to her parents instead of her heart, that she'd chosen security over happiness, and had been paying for it ever since. I asked what she meant. She admitted that Julian wasn't who she thought he was, that the pressure of maintaining his image had made him controlling and distant. That her parents still weren't satisfied, because nothing was ever enough for them. Then she mentioned something that made the pieces click: Julian's firm had been struggling. They'd lost several major clients to more efficient competitors, and he'd been passed over for senior partner twice now. She looked at me with these desperate eyes and said, "I should have believed in us, Alex. I should have waited. And I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a kind of distant sadness for the person she could have been. I told her that was her choice to make, that she'd chosen the path she thought was safe, and now she had to live with it. She started to say something about second chances, about how we'd been good together once. I stopped her there. Told her gently but firmly that I was with someone now, someone who'd never asked me to be anything other than myself, and that I was happy in a way I'd never been with her. You didn't just choose Julian, Chloe, I said. You chose your parents' approval over building something real. And that's something I can't fix for you. Her face crumpled a little. She asked if I hated her. I told her honestly that I didn't, that I'd stopped thinking about her years ago. Somehow, that seemed to hurt her more than anger would have. We stood there for another minute in awkward silence. Then she thanked me for talking to her and walked back to where Julian was waiting, looking annoyed and checking his phone. The real irony came 2 weeks later when Julian's firm reached out to Marcus about a potential partnership. They wanted to integrate Streamline AI into their document management system. Said they were losing clients because their processes were too slow and outdated. Marcus brought me the inquiry with this knowing look, and I had to laugh at the cosmic joke of it all. Julian Hay's law firm, the same firm that represented everything the Harrisons valued, was now coming to me for help because they couldn't keep up with the market. I thought about it for exactly 5 seconds before I told Marcus to decline politely. I said we were focused on clients who'd supported us from the beginning, not ones who only showed up when they were desperate. Marcus didn't argue. He just sent a professional response, referring them to our competitors. A few days later, Mr. Harrison called the office directly. Marcus transferred it to me before I could stop him. Chloe's dad used his business voice, the smooth one he probably used with everyone. He talked about how impressive our growth had been, how he'd been following our success, asked if we'd reconsider working with Julian's firm. I let him finish, let him compliment my business acumen, and then I very politely told him that we had a full client roster and were being selective about new partnerships. He offered premium rates, expedited payments, whatever we needed. I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice, the realization that he was asking for a favor from someone he'd once considered beneath his daughter. Maya asked me later if I felt vindicated, if turning them down felt like justice. I had to think about it. The truth was, it didn't feel like anything dramatic. It just felt like closing a door that should have been closed years ago. I'd spent 2 years thinking about them, another 2 years not thinking about them, and now they were back asking for help, and I simply didn't owe them anything. They wanted someone who was already successful, I told Maya. I became successful without them, and that's the whole point. She kissed me and said that was the right answer, and we went back to planning our weekend trip. Something simple and normal in our lives. Chloe tried reaching out one more time about a month later. I saw a message request from a new account, but I didn't open it. I just archived it without reading, because whatever she had to say wasn't going to change anything. The Harrisons stopped calling. Julian's firm found some other solution, and my life continued forward without them in it. 6 months after that tech conference, I heard through the industry grapevine that Julian had left his firm. Something about the partners pushing him out after too many blown opportunities. And apparently, the Harrisons were not taking it well. But by then, I was already on to the next thing, expanding Streamline AI into new markets, planning a future with Maya, and living a life where their approval had never mattered less. What do you think was the biggest turning point in my journey?